Why are we so divided as a people? Is it because we genuinely disagree with each other on so many issues, or is there something else going on? Let's find out. I'm Dr. Prashant Sharma, and welcome to Finding Om, that's AUM, Awareness, Understanding, and Mastery, the channel where we combine spirituality and mental health to live a more meaningful life. We seem to be so divided as a country and even the world that at times things seem hopeless, as if we can't find any common ground. But is this an accurate assessment of reality? The truth is a lot muddier than you think. We are going to be discussing two terms that seem complicated, but they're actually quite simple once you boil it down: polarization and cognitive dissonance. The reason this topic came up in my mind is the state of the world nowadays, and I thought it might be useful to discuss this. I do want to point out that this is not a political episode, but we will be drawing parallels to politics as we discuss. Now, what is polarization? The type of polarization we're discussing is, quote, division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs, end quote. And no, we're not discussing polarization of particles in physics. I know, big surprise there on this channel. But basically, polarization is what drives a group of people into two separate camps. And this can be on nearly anything, including politics, science, social justice issues, religions, and other topics. Now, the way polarization happens is over time. It's a gradual process that takes place over the course of an individual or a group's life. It can start pretty early, but it's important to note that as kids, most of the time, we don't have extreme viewpoints or very black and white stances on big issues. But these viewpoints are taught over time. It could be teachings passed down to us from our families, from books we read, TV we watch, or social media we consume. One concept that has been discussed recently is the idea of filter bubbles. Basically, social media algorithms are designed to record what we like or content we interact with, and then the algorithm proceeds to curate the content so it becomes more and more narrow to our field of interest. We can notice this not only in social media, but in other places, like if you use a Google or Apple newsfeed, you might notice the results get closer and closer to what you want to see. In an effort to bring us news, ads, and other media more relevant to our interests, the process leads us to become more narrow in the content we consume. Now, ordinarily, if we're, let's say, shopping for hats, this might be a convenient thing. If I'm in the market for a fedora, getting more information on the different types of fedoras is good. Are there different types of fedoras? I don't really know. But anyway, that's a benign example, but the curation of content can sometimes be problematic in other areas. This is where polarization comes in. The obvious examples are in politics and social justice, both of which have become central in the news these days. As our content in these areas get more and more curated, our repertoire or stock of ideas or beliefs becomes more narrow. And polarization in these areas can impact other things. For instance, this was shown in a study by Cass Sunstein, Tali Sharot, and colleagues, where they tested participants in categorizing geometric shapes. Part of the task was for the people in the study to ask for advice from others, so it's a very non-political task. However, they found that folks in the study tended to seek advice from people who held similar political views, and they were basing that person's competence in categorizing geometric shapes based on their political views rather than anything else. Obviously, this is a small example, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. Another interesting study in the realm of politics was done by William Brady and colleagues, who tested political messages on Twitter, trying to find which ones are more likely to be shared. When looking at tweets from the 2016 election, specifically those from the presidential, Senate, and House of Representatives candidates, they found that tweets with more emotive and moral words were more likely to be tweeted, and voters responded more to words showing moral outrage. So we can argue that these tweets are more polarizing on either side of the aisle, and they serve to solidify existing viewpoints further. So let's say we have person A, who is a staunch liberal. Their Twitter feed will be curated to be more along their personal viewpoints. Same for the other side. And if you keep seeing tweets from the other party that spark moral outrage, it makes you even more cemented in your views. Now, this type of polarization can be seen in a lot of areas. Obviously, politics, like elections of candidates, social justice issues like minority rights, the division between folks who are pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, and so on. Polarization also implies a binary choice. It's either this or that, positive or negative, black or white, and it implies that there is no moderate viewpoint in the discussion. And we can see this in the political environment as candidates drive more and more to appeal to a given base which may be more extreme than moderate. In fact, it's hard to think of any moderate political candidate who has won a major election recently. It's a strange concept because we are also taught as kids that life is about compromise, sharing, and understanding. Educators try to teach us this starting as early as preschool and kindergarten, but it gets lost along the way to polarization. Now, why is this so important, and why is this on my mind? Well, it worries me that we are becoming more and more entrenched in our individual viewpoints on almost every topic, and that we cannot seem to engage in any debate or logical discourse these days without the discussion becoming intensely emotional and crumbling completely. Nowadays, there's a lot of othering that happens, which is folks in one camp will regard the individuals in the other camp as quote unquote the others, and that there is little in common to be had, and none of us are immune to this. Now, before, we were talking about tweets becoming more emotive and attention-grabbing, people responding to tweets expressing moral outrage. Of course, these tweets being more extreme or polarized. Tweets that are more extreme will also put people on the other side on the defensive. Now, let's boil this down to a simple concept. Let's say you're at a get-together and you're talking about, I don't know, how delicious milkshakes are. And let's say someone comes out of the woodworks at the party and starts to criticize you, saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you would say that. The amount of sugar in milkshakes is disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're going to get diabetes and heart disease. And I think there is something wrong with you if you enjoy milkshakes." You would find this quite offensive, and in turn, you would become defensive, right? You would respond in a hostile manner, react negatively, and your viewpoint on milkshakes isn't going to change anytime soon. Basically, this person cannot change your perspective using this strategy. And unfortunately, this is the type of political discourse going on these days, especially in social media. It certainly doesn't help that these days debates happen across a limit of 280 characters or tweets, and short 30-second videos, quick clips of people repeating platitudes. But getting back to the difficulties in changing our viewpoints after polarization, this leads us to the term I mentioned earlier, cognitive dissonance. This is the stress we experience in our minds when we hear an idea or belief that is drastically different from a belief we hold very strongly. It almost creates a sort of distress in our minds, and we try to resolve the distress by limiting information that disagrees with our already established viewpoints. So, for instance, if I'm hesitant about taking the vaccine, I seek out information about the dangers of taking the vaccine and move away from information that is promising about the vaccine. There is a natural tendency to do that because we are more comfortable and the information we see is more consistent with our belief system. So you can see where the problems arise, right? We tend to want to stay within our bubbles and not expand our horizons when it comes to ideas or beliefs. As a result, our viewpoints don't change, and even the way we view other people with differing viewpoints does not change. And this leads to less compromise, less understanding of others, and less empathy for what others are going through. We've seen this happen over and over again. Less understanding and compromise in the political environment has led to entire bills falling apart on the Senate floor, shutdown of the government, such a lack of compromise that the system becomes paralyzed. Whereas if we had more understanding, things might be different. An example within social justice that comes up is Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem at a football game so many years ago. There was one side that was so morally outraged by the action itself and felt like it was an action that disrespected the country and flag. Meanwhile, there was so much pain and suffering happening in the black community that it led to him kneeling during the game in order to draw attention to it. But the moral outrage was so severe that these core ideas could not be discussed in any calm or logical way so that there could have been at least some understanding on this debate. Similarly, after the events with George Floyd and numerous other African Americans being killed by the police, one of the terms that came about was, quote, defund the police. Now, it's interesting that the term defund was chosen, which implies removing a large portion of the funds, and even some discussing dismantling entire departments and police forces. Now, you can see that if you are someone who is supportive of law enforcement, perhaps you have family in the police force, things like that, hearing this term will spark some form of outrage, which it did in a lot of people. Even though a lot of the recommendations coming from the think tanks were about decreasing police funding to pre 9/11 levels, the defund and dismantle terms were thrown around a lot, creating more polarization and division. And yet again, the key issues could not be discussed in a calm or logical way. Now, as you guys know, I like to relate ideas to spirituality in some way, and I want to talk to you about the idea of the middle path. As most people know, this is a key concept in Buddhism, and I do believe that this idea is important to bring into the areas we talked about, because if we can learn to meet people halfway, we can learn to understand them better, be more empathic towards them, and we can more easily reach a compromise. In the end, we need a workable solution to any problem, and reacting in an extreme way just gets the other side to shut down. And that is the opposite of what we desire. We want free-flowing discourse and debate. After all, that is what democracy is all about, right? So what do we need to do? We need to be more understanding of others' viewpoints and perspectives, but really, we need some changes in the types of media we consume and how we consume them. For instance, a lot of people get their news and information from places like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and while I don't have anything specifically against the platforms, we need to keep in mind they foster information in limited messages, a few slides, very short videos, and not only is our collective attention span decreasing, these short bursts of information are not nearly enough to understand complex issues like, for instance, the crisis in Afghanistan or countless other issues. One of the reasons I decided to do podcasting and YouTube was because I felt there was a need to slow things down. I wanted to engage in a medium that allows me to completely flesh out a topic rather than try to summarize it in 30 or 60 seconds. I did try to do some educational materials on other forums like Instagram Reels, and I just couldn't get into it due to the length being so short, and I just couldn't get through a topic in any significant depth. That also gets me thinking about the presidential debates when a candidate has 60 seconds to respond to a question that probably deserves more like 20 minutes or half an hour to fully discuss. It doesn't do justice to the topic, and voters make decisions based on these quick responses. And this decision leads to who gets elected to be president and one of the most powerful people in the world. It's crazy. And look, I don't know what the answer is, but what I do know is we need to take a close look at these forums and think about changing how we get our information. At the very least, we can start small, by each one of us trying to understand other viewpoints better, seeking out information from folks with perspectives different from ours, reading or listening to in-depth articles about issues rather than short snippets, and accepting that we will disagree with other people, and that's okay. Also, being comfortable with changing our minds on a given topic if we're convinced by new information on that topic. If we can be a little less rigid, we would be one step closer to compromise. I want to leave you with a story about one of my favorite spiritual leaders, Ram Dass. At the time, he was in India, spending time with and learning from Neem Karoli Baba, a teacher and guru there. And Neem Karoli Baba said to Ram Dass, quote, "Listen, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth." And to that, Ram Dass replied, "Well, to tell you the truth, I don't love everyone." But in that exchange, Ram Dass really learned that he needed to let go of some of these things that were keeping him in a state of anger, irritability, distress, and disgust. And letting go brought him one step closer to understanding, really understanding, other people. All right, folks, that's it for this episode. I'm Dr. Prashant Sharma, and this is Finding Om. That's AUM, Awareness, Understanding, and Mastery, where we combine spirituality and mental health to live a more meaningful life. Thank you for watching, and remember, love everyone and tell the truth. Till next time, friends.